Vampires are sexy. They shouldn't be. They are essentially just serial killing leeches, but they are. It's just a reality we gotta deal with. I already covered this topic, but the Lost Boys did a lot of good PR for these creatures of the night. They always kinda were a bit sexy since the Lugosi days, but they are definitively hot now. And there's like subgenres of hot in them these days. You know, there's a little something for everybody. There's your sparklies, your classics, your disco daddies, your I'm into the freaky shits. But there's like a tier list, right? And everybody's got their own ranking system. One person might be smitten with Buffy's British boy Spike. Another might be more into the southern hospitality of a Bill Compton. But one thing I think we can all agree on, and if you don't, you are stupid and wrong, is that the S tier of vampire sexiness, the peak of this medium, which all character design, costuming and general hotness should be judged from. The tippy top of Suck Me Daddies is undoubtedly angsty anime goth boys. Powerful. Powerful. Vampire Hunter D was always kind of an elusive thing to me. As a kid, my only exposure to the franchise was through an old PlayStation magazine that did a big 2-page spread on the at the time upcoming PS1 title. Something a bit like this one. It had a whole bunch of screenshots in it. It talked about this crazy sounding setup with this cool vampire goth dude that had a talking hand that sassed him and stuff. And man, this gothic aesthetic interpreted through the abstraction of low poly visuals, it scratched a little part of my baby brain to the point I must have scanned over those 2 pages 100 times. I wanted to know so much more about this thing, but this was before the days where my family had the internet, and in terms of just going to a game store to pick it up, that was always just out of reach. I didn't have an allowance or anything as a kid, so the only way I was getting a hold of it was by asking for it for Christmas. And there was no way in hell my mum was going to get me a survival horror looking game, considering she once confiscated a different magazine from me after she realised it featured a review of Nightmare Creatures that just vaguely described some of its gore. And obviously, she was right to do that. God forbid I grow up to be a strange weirdo obsessed with horror. That would be tragic. It didn't matter that this Vampire Hunter D game always evaded my grasp in childhood though, because something about the name, the visuals, the world I imagined this whole thing taking place in, even the font, just buried itself like a little seed in my grey matter, just waiting to one day sprout. And that day eventually came as an adult, when the overwhelming sensation to look into this elusive mystery game suddenly overcame me. So I did, only to find out that this was like a whole massive media franchise spanning originally from a long-running book series that's one of the best-selling book series in the world? I had no idea, but that just made it more mysterious and exciting to me. This wasn't just a mere video game, but 40 novels, with cover art illustrated by Yoshitaka Amano of Final Fantasy fame, anime movies, manga, comic adaptations, audio dramas. There was a whole world of stuff to explore besides the iceberg tip of the video game that had previously been completely unknown to me. It was like stumbling into the treasure-laden lost city of El Dorado, only if El Dorado paved its streets not with gold, but with sexy goth boys. And that's the real treasure if you ask me. That's actually what they're going to find at the end of One Piece, you know. But the cream of the crop for me as I scrolled through this endless barrage of potential wonders to uncover was the second film adaptation, Vampire Hunter D: Bloodlust. Why this thing in particular out of everything there? Well, that's because, oh my god, look at it. Just, fuck it. With the cape. And it's wings against the moon. Whew. Originally released in 2000, Vampire Hunter D: Bloodlust is an adaptation of the third book in the series. You can jump straight into this one though, it's not really a follow-up to the first movie. I mean, It technically is, it came about off the back of fan demand for more after the first film, but that film was released all the way back in 1985 as an OVA by a totally different team with a totally different art style, a different voice cast save for all but one of the Japanese actors who's the same in both films, a completely different level of budget, and it's just generally speaking a whole different kettle of fish. They're all mostly standalone pulpy adventures anyway, which is why they can jump straight into adapting the third book. There straight up is no adaptation of the second novel. So even if you were trying to force there to be a continuous plotline you could follow through both films, there's not really a connective tissue to try and do that with besides picking up a book between viewings. And picking up a book? What are you, a nerd? You are, by the way. You're watching a skeleton man on YouTube talk about vampire anime. You are. So Bloodlust opens on this striking image of a stunningly large moon framed in the jagged patterns of impossible architecture, immediately greeting us with its incredibly crafted imagery as the camera tracks back through the tilted crosses of an old graveyard, demonstrating the kind of depth and motion you can expect in this animation. It looks expensive, just absolute premium quality, top tier anime gorgeousness, immediately setting itself apart from the previous film, which did have a charm of its own, but visually could not hold a candle to the spectacle of this opening shot alone. It's an immediate mood setter and continues into a tone-establishing prologue where a young woman in Victorian garb is kidnapped cinematically by a vampire who storms into town in a horse-drawn carriage. The film does not mess around in terms of getting you right into the action and delivering you into a reality crafted with beautiful line art and evocative dark colouring and visual flair. So much imagination and creativity is poured into every frame. From the way the crosses and vegetation crumble with our mysterious kidnapper's entrance, to the moment he takes her, playing out in crashing zooms and the lack of his reflection in the mirror making her body look like it floats in its limp state. Everything is shown to us with as much visual splendour as possible, fully immersing us in this world and visuals. In terms of an explanation of this world, we get 7 sentences of exposition, and the rest is kind of a just figure it out as you go along sort of deal, which I'm totally grateful for. The movie will often throw out all kinds of nonsense with no explanation, like it's assumed you can just take these things at face value. Crazy future tech, vaccinations that cause astral projection, spaceship castles, and talking left hands that can inhale magic are all elements the film puts in front of you as if they require no further elaboration, either as though it's assumed you'll have knowledge on how all of this stuff works and functions already, or if you don't, that it doesn't matter anyway. It can create a sense of chaos to the plot a little, with elements that seem to have an expansive history and explanation appearing and disappearing for a single scene whenever their inclusion becomes relevant in advancing the narrative. But for me, this only made the world more compelling. While I'm sure there is a 100-page long Wikipedia article that could explain all of the ridiculous and contrasting facets of this reality, I'm reliably told there's a whole backstory about a huge nuclear holocaust and vampires fighting aliens that explains away all of the cyber elements and space travel stuff, but it really doesn't matter here, because Bloodlust merely uses this expansive reality as the beautiful set dressing to a genuinely very simple plot. There's lots of implications of big things outside of the key focus of its narrative, but primarily the only thing that matters within this movie's runtime is the Romeo and Juliet-esque star-crossed lovers plotline that occupies its centre. That and the rule of cool styling, where if something's inclusion within the film would be visually or narratively cool, then it supersedes importance over all other elements, be it the plot, time for character development, coherent explanations of its reality, or anything that's not incredible compositions and spectacular set pieces. That's not to say the plot is without merit. It's totally solid, it's just a straightforward one that happens to occupy a not so straightforward world. The story revolves around the kidnapping of the girl from the prologue I've already mentioned. Her name is Charlotte Elborn, and she has been abducted by Mayor Link, a vampiric baron. After she is stolen, her father offers Dee, a half-vampire, half-human bounty hunter, a lot of money to rescue her. He also doubles down and hires another group of vampire hunters known as the Marcus Brothers to do the same thing. A crew of 5 people that includes their leader Borgoff, a big brute of a dude called Nolt, a speedy weapon master called Kyle, a sickly psychic known as Grove, and Layla, the only girl in the gang who carries a deep hatred for vampire kind. Dee and the Marcus brothers group pursue their bounty independently, though naturally, both their paths cross as they are after the same prize. To complicate things further, the abduction is apparently not what it seems. As it turns out, Charlotte and Maya are actually in love, and Charlotte does not want to return home and seeks instead to leave this planet with her lover for the City of Night, a vampire refuge in space where they can live together happily. There's also, during this whole saga, a slowly blossoming companionship between Dee and Layla that occurs throughout the story, one that initially is hostile due to Layla's mistrust of all things vampire, but I'd say by the end, despite the pretty thin plotting of the film, actually hits a real emotional payoff. One that, without divulging huge amounts of backstory, tells us a lot about the somber, short-spoken and cut-off nature of Dee's character. Ironically, by giving us a moment where we are allowed to see an unfamiliar humanity in him that doesn't reflect any of those expected characteristics. So yeah, the narrative might not be the most incredibly complex and pronounced thing in the world, essentially boiling down to one long drawn out chase scene, but hey, work for Fury Road, and that movie's a masterpiece. And when it comes to Bloodlust, I still do honestly think there's some appeal to its plot, especially what I consider to be its emotionally strong third act, which I'm told deviates massively from the book. It's just not necessarily the main appeal. No, the main appeal of this thing is just that it's as gorgeous as its titular character. Though the movie came out properly in 2001, it was in development since 1997, and it has that absolutely stunning, rad 90s anime style. You know what I mean, the hand-drawn world and characters, the beautiful line art, the slightly washed out bloom, the expressive character design and animation. It's the look, the vibe, the 90s anime chic. You know, the look. The kind of cowboy bebop, Ghost in the Shell, City Hunter, Neon Genesis, Akira look. That magical level of hand-drawn heaven that doesn't really exist anymore. As we kind of began to really break into the 2000s, you started to see anime look a lot more digitally clean with bright popping colours. And I imagine it's incredibly expensive, inefficient and time consuming to make something that looks like Bloodlust does now. I'm not going to pretend I know anywhere near enough about the changes in the Japanese animation industry to understand what factors, tech and developments caused this, but what I can say is that Dee still has that hard to pin down, ethereal 90s dreamlike quality and detail to it. Maybe it's nostalgia goggles talking, but there's just a vibe this period has that's aesthetically enchanting. And before anyone takes me out of context here, I'm not saying that modern anime is bad for moving away from this trend or there isn't beautifully complex and wonderful animation made today. My favourite anime movie is Summer Wars, and that does all sorts of stuff with its style and absolutely none of it mirrors this 90s aesthetic. But you gotta admit, as good as things are now, the highs of this late 90s, early 2000s period of visuals within this medium just absolutely ruled. And Dee here is such a perfect example of it. Slick, stylized action and movement, larger than life character designs, beautiful use of colour and immaculate vibes that just emanate from its every frame. Its intricately detailed art style paints this post-apocalyptic future seen through the lens of a Dracula-esque Victorian Gothic horror filled with Baroque castles and costuming. It's a wholly unique setting, combining future tech with the influences of classical horror and westerns animated to perfection with so much craft. I cannot even begin to comprehend the amount of work that goes in animating even one shot of action in this thing. Never mind the extended, high stakes, fluidly realised, jaw-dropping set pieces. The film is riddled with sword fights and explosions and supernatural duels that create a totally unmatched level of visual imagination, made even better by the fact that it all takes place against this Victorian Gothic backdrop that we normally associate with this kind of slow creeping horror of the stories that often occupy this setting. Interestingly, the film was made with a Western audience in mind, and for that reason, the English dub was the first version of the film released. Even in Japan they got this dub, and it was subtitled in Japanese for that theatrical release. I watched it dubbed in English for this reason, as it seemed to be the authorial intent, although it did get a Japanese dub too later down the line I haven't checked out yet. I will say, I didn't love the English dub. It's not bad at all. In fact, it's pretty good, especially for the time period, but I think I've just been spoiled by the voice acting of Castlevania for my goth vampire epics, because I was kind of hoping for something on that level, and it's just It's not quite there. But you know, the voice cast for Castlevania are all absolutely perfect to the characters, and I think it's one of the best animated voice casts anywhere. Plus it was made in America, so it probably had an easier time casting for the nuance of dialects and stuff, so that's not really a fair metric to compare it to. I've heard the Japanese dub is good as well, so if you boot it up and the English isn't working for you, then you've at least got other options. If you do choose to watch it though, I can guarantee you that no matter which version you end up settling for, you'll be in for some Gothic visual splendour like no other. Splendour that might be a little thin on plot, but that still manages to hit when it matters and makes up for its stripped down narrative with an enticing, moody, and beautifully realised world you will never want to leave. And once again, that brings us to a close on yet another episode of this Wholesome Halloween marathon. Before you go though, let me just remind you of this month's big announcements. Did you know that this month's videos are in support of Trans Lifeline? 100% of ad revenue and my Patreon income for this month will be going directly to the charity, as well as all profits from the Dan Drambles charity t-shirt, mock-up design seen here. Final print will feature a larger, high-quality screen print on organic ethical shirts from one of the country's best suppliers. These are available to pre-order this whole month at the link in the description, and there should be donate buttons on this page if you wish to make a direct donation to the charity. Also, unrelated to the Trans Lifeline charity efforts, did you know 2 other cool things are happening right now? Firstly, if I'm still in the competition at the time of this vid's release, I am running once more to be this year's Face of Horror. You can vote for me once every day for free or buy more votes if you're so inclined, and doing so will help the B+ Foundation, which funds childhood cancer research. And finally, did you know that I am accredited advisor on the next entry in the smash hit In Search of Darkness series? This incredible horror documentary saga is making its first foray into the 90s decade, and as an advisor, I'm able to offer a 10% discount on this film. I'm thrilled to be working with the In Search of Darkness team. It's going to be another banger. Check all this out and more at the links in the description below. Other than that, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my Only Dans with the red button below. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next vid, and I will see you all again tomorrow.